Hi, my name's Tommy Pigott. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications of the Republican National Committee, and welcome to the Republican Rundown. We're going to be breaking down all the facts you need to beat that Democrat in your life in a debate, all the latest news. I'm here with Madison, Gesiotto, Gilbert. Madison, good to see you.
Good to be with you, Tommy.
So I thought we'd jump right into it, talk about these border numbers that were recently released, if we could put those stats on the screen so people could see them. So 270,000 illegal border crossings in a single month. The worst month at the border on record. The most illegal immigrants crossing the border in a single month ever recorded in DHS history. And yet Biden is saying that his policies are working. What's your reaction when you hear Biden saying his policies are working when we're seeing a crisis like this at the border?
It's just so insulting, Tommy. I mean, time and time again, they continue to say they're doing a good job, whether it be the border, the economy, or pretty much any issue that they're failing on. But to the border specifically, you point out this is an all-time high. They continue to really do nothing about it. They don't care, and American people are going to suffer as a result. We don't know who's coming into the country. We don't know what's coming into the country. And time again, this continues to happen. It's extremely frustrating. There are people out there that are trying to do something about it. Attorney General Ken Paxton in Texas now suing the Biden administration just this week for them coming in and actually cutting razor wire at the border. Of course, saying this puts the border security of Texas at greater risk and of the country. And then, of course, also claiming that this is a destruction of Texas property.
Yeah, it's outrageous that you have an administration in Joe Biden that's going out there saying numbers are going down when they're not, saying their policy is working when it's not, having Democrats that are supporting Joe Biden every step of the way to say that these open border policies are what we should have when we shouldn't be having them. And then you have Republican governors that are actually working to do Joe Biden's job, sending National Guard down to the border, putting up border barriers, demanding transparency. And then you have Joe Biden actively trying to stop them from securing the border. It's like insult on top of injury here.
Yeah, but I do think to a certain extent you are seeing a shift among people. Now, you're not seeing necessarily a shift among all of the Democratic lawmakers or leaders in the different states. But when you talk to people in states like New York City, in states like Chicago, in places all across the country where they have had extremely high crime, where they have been impacted by some of this crime coming from people crossing the border illegally multiple times after being deported, coming back, nothing being done about it. And when their communities and their families start to be impacted, they start to pay attention in a different way. And they start to seek facts themselves. And that's when they recognize that they've been lied to for a very long time by Democrat leaders like President Joe Biden himself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that every state's now a border state because of these border policies.
Right.
When you have New York, the mayor saying it's going to destroy his city, this crisis. And this is just the people that we know are crossing the border. We haven't even touched on, you talked about we don't know who's crossing or what is crossing. We haven't talked about the 1.6 million illegal immigrants that have crossed the border and escaped into the country. Escaped law enforcement. We have no idea who they are, and we know that cartels are smuggling lethal drugs over the border. I mean, that 1.6 million, that number is huge. I can't even wrap my head around it.
I mean, you can only imagine the numbers when it comes to people and, again, drugs, as you mentioned, fentanyl being the one specifically that's talked about the most recently, that come across that we simply don't know about. When you're seeing record high encounters, again, they're pretty much being encouraged by the bad policies of the Biden administration to do this. You're seeing single males from all across the world coming across that southern border. A lot of times you're seeing children used that are not actually the children of the people trying to cross as pawns, sometimes sexually assaulted, which is absolutely horrible to see. So it's a humanitarian crisis at the border, as we've mentioned on the show before. And it's just a whole multitude of issues, a complete disaster. And the border needs secured first and foremost before we can even talk about addressing what's going on legally with the courts, with the backlogs, with everything that's going to be needed done to fix the immigration system long term past having a secure border.
When you have a fire raging in your house, the first thing you do is you put out the fire. You don't talk about fire prevention. You do that. You have to put out the fire that's raging. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous that they're not focusing on solving this crisis. And it really is this humanitarian crisis like you discussed and that national security issue. I mean, the fact that we have a skyrocketing number of terrorist suspects, that CBP, Customs and Border Protection, is putting out warnings that we could see even more terrorists trying to cross this border. And we have 1.6 million people who have escaped into this country unapprehended. It really paints a worrying picture about the international terrorist threat that could be entering this country because of this open border.
It's very scary, and people have been talking about this for quite some time, but now you're finally seeing someone actually acknowledge this threat after what happened in Israel, and you saw the terrorist attack there on October 7th, the war that continues in the Middle East. And now people are worried. They're seeing, could this happen in my backyard? Could this happen in my community? And they're asking the questions to the lawmakers, and the lawmakers are having to acknowledge this. But again, it's kind of too little too late in so many ways. Yes, we want to continue to push to make sure that they stop now. However, what's already been done and who's already gotten here, we don't even know. And so it's kind of scary to think about what could potentially happen as a result of that.
I mean, the world is such a more dangerous place under Joe Biden, which is why when he came in claiming he was this foreign policy expert, no one believed him, I think, or the vast majority of people didn't, especially those that worked with him, such as Robert Gates, saying he got almost every single issue wrong. I think one of those issues on the foreign policy front that he has gotten incredibly wrong is Iran. And we have Ted Cruz, I think, put this really well when he was describing how Joe Biden's policies have really enriched the Iranian regime. If we could play that clip, please.
Number one, we need to cut off the funding that has enabled this attack to happen. And what is so infuriating is that over the last 2.5 years, Joe Biden and the Biden administration have flowed nearly $100 billion to Iran. Understand, Hamas is a proxy for Iran. Without Iran, there would be no Hamas. And
$100 billion, whether that's in appeasement policies regarding relief, quote unquote, that is being sent, whether that's failure to enforce oil sanctions, which is allowing the Iranian regime to enrich themselves. It seems like the fundamental principle that you should not be sending money to terrorists is one that Joe Biden still does not quite get.
No, and he doesn't seem to care to get that. You look back to even 2015 when he was vice president, he was the #1 spokesperson under the Obama administration for the Iran nuclear deal. Obviously, that was nixed during the Trump administration. Biden comes in as president, immediately starts trying to renegotiate that deal, thinking it was a good idea, which it never was. Ted Cruz is absolutely right. Hamas would not exist without Iran, but Joe Biden continues to turn a blind eye to that. Immediately following what happened on October 7th, they should have refroze the $6 billion at the very least. That was part of that hostage negotiation, but they didn't do that either. Every single thing that seems like common sense, that you as a leader, I as a leader, that anybody who cares about the safety of this nation, the safety of our ally Israel, the safety of even the Middle East region as a whole, would do, is the opposite of what Biden seems to have done and continues to refuse to do.
It really is common sense. I mean, you had a maximum pressure campaign that was working when Republicans were in power under President Trump. You had sanctions that were put in place. You had an Iranian regime that was broke. You had terrorist proxies that were broke. Biden comes in and decides to send them money. And we've gotten nothing in return from that except for more terrorist attacks, which, as you said, would be common sense. When you send money to terrorist organizations, you get more terrorist attacks. Why do you think Joe Biden is refusing to recognize that common sense? Why do you think he is still so determined on this Iranian nuclear deal, so much so that he's willing to give a pass to all these other terrible things that the Iranian regime's doing?
I mean, is that not the million-dollar question? Why does he do anything he does or not do anything he should do? He's a terrible leader. He should not be president of the United States. He's a career politician that's been in office for decades, not serving the American people as a senator, not serving the American people in any of his positions. Even as vice president, not particularly impressive. A horrible administration. The Obama administration promised the world, didn't deliver. And now he's doing the same and worse as president himself. It's not surprising. But again, why he does it, who knows? Why do any of these people do what they do when they go on the campaign trail? They promise us everything, and then they get into office and do the exact opposite. It's extremely disappointing for Americans to keep experiencing this. And I talk to Democrats. Again, these are people not necessarily ready to vote for us as Republicans yet, but they're thinking about it. And they say, hey, I voted for Biden thinking his experience would help him be a good leader. Look at all the experience he had. And we're seeing that that's not necessarily always the case with somebody who's already been in office before. And then, of course, he also made a lot of promises on other things like taxes and the economy and the state of the country domestically, and he wasn't able to keep those either.
Yeah, I think it's a great distinction to make between an experience of success and an experience of failure. And Joe Biden has failed time and time again, in office after office, in initiative after initiative. But he is that D.C. career politician where he refuses to admit any mistakes. He refuses to actually say he got something wrong. And he's still out there saying that foreign policy is somehow a reason he should be reelected. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I think it's also, I think you made a great point bringing up those other promises that he made, such as on the economy. He promised to really help working Americans, to help middle-class families, and he promised to help strengthen the American dream. And I think there's a couple articles that came out this week that show how it's the opposite under Biden. If we could put those articles up on the screen just so people could see the reality of what Biden's doing. So under Joe Biden, you have, for many people, many people throughout history have really viewed the American dream as being able to afford a home. But under Joe Biden, you have home affordability really declining, home costs skyrocketing. 99% of America is now considered unaffordable when it comes to the housing market. You have your dollar going half as far as it did just a few years ago because of surging mortgage rates and because of rising prices. And then you also have mortgage rates at the highest levels since 2000. So that's really undermining the American dream. I mean, what's your reaction when you see these stats compared to what Biden promised to do for working men and women in the middle class?
Well, I think it's heartbreaking, Tommy. You look at our parents' generation and the way they were able to live the American dream in a way that people our age simply don't feel like they are able to. You look at people in their 20s and in their 30s not able to buy homes, as you mentioned, because of the cost being so incredibly high. Pre-pandemic prices of homes now up 40% just a few short years later. Goldman Sachs is estimating that by the end of next year, those will go up another 3.5%. Many people are being forced to rent as a result. It's 52% costlier to purchase a home right now than it is to rent. And this is not the American dream. And this is, again, one of those examples of something that didn't have to be this way. Mortgages didn't have to be at 8%. Inflation did not have to be up. The cost of living does not have to be up. Cost of everything now is up close to 18%, and wages are stagnant, down over 3%. No matter what measure you look at, no matter what statistic you look at, it's not looking good. But they continue, just as you mentioned on the border, they continue to come to the podium and stare at us in the eyes as Americans and say things are going great, the economy's turning around, things are going to be wonderful, inflation's going down. And everybody knows, even if you're a Democrat who voted for Biden and is going to vote for him again, you know that that is simply not true because you're living it. We all are. And that's the frustrating thing, is that people don't open their eyes and recognize that they're living it because of these Democratic policies, because of the failures of Joe Biden. And that's what I think people really need to open their eyes to that haven't already.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right to point out it didn't have to be this way, that Joe Biden was warned. He was warned by liberal economists not to waste $1.9 trillion. He was warned not to undermine American energy. He was warned about all these things, and yet he did it anyway. And that's why we're seeing this. And you mentioned rent. Rent prices are skyrocketing as well. I think there was one poll that really put to me how the mindset of the American people has shifted when it comes to their greatest financial concern. It's no longer saving for retirement. It's no longer trying to get ahead. It's affording monthly expenses. And that, to me, really epitomizes what Biden has done to the American economy. From an economy where people think they can get ahead to an economy where getting by is now an accomplishment. And it's such a tragedy, like you said.
Yeah, it just breaks your heart. I mean, when you think about so many people who have worked very hard, put themselves through college, put themselves through graduate school, went into a trade and saved up their money, and now are in a position where they're not able to afford even a starter home. When you look at the numbers, even from that article that was up earlier in the segment, 99% of places across the country, to the average home buyer, homes are unaffordable. That is complete insanity. 99%. Not 9%, not 19%, 99%. And we're talking about the average income for a household being $71,000. There was a time, even in our lifetimes, not that long ago, in which this would put you in a very wonderful home and you'd still have money left over to save. And that is not the reality today, and that is very unfair.
Yeah, and he's claiming it's working when all Americans are struggling under these policies, and it's not. One thing's for certain, if we want to solve and fix this insanity, we have to get Republican control of the Senate. We have to strengthen our House majority. We have to win the presidency in 2024. It's the only way to make sure that we end this disastrous Bidenomics. And we're going to be here every week trying to do that. Madison, thank you for helping to break down these facts and figures, getting the facts out there. And we'll be sure to touch base next week and do this again.
Thanks, Tommy. Looking forward to next week.